Welcome back to Boomi Essentials. In this section, we're going to be covering some of the Atomsphere basics. Let's start by talking a little bit more about the Atomsphere platform to learn about the various options available to you. We'll be concentrating mostly on the Build tab, since that's where we're going to be spending most of our time. On the outside looking in, Dell Boomi integration serves as the central hub between all of your data. Here is a visual depiction of what we do at a high level. The best way to think of our service is as cloud middleware. We are the plumbing between various applications, whether they reside in the cloud or on-premise. We have the ability to integrate applications in the cloud, on-premise, and a combination of both. Now let's take a look at some of the features of the Atomsphere UI. It's important to be familiar with the terminology and identification of the various sections of the Atomsphere UI, because throughout the training, we'll be referencing these items by name. Once logged in, the Welcome tab is automatically displayed. Within this tab, a window is displayed containing links to open a recent item, you can create a new component, or quickly access our reference guide to learn about many of the common Atomsphere procedures. Next, we have the administration links. These links can be found at the upper right hand of the screen, and from here you can control and access account settings. You can quickly gain access to support materials and services, or switch between your various Dell Boomi applications. It's important that you make sure that you're in the training account that was specially created for this training. If your account name does not start with Boomi Training, then you can switch to your training account by hovering over your cursor over the account name and selecting Switch Account. This will pull up a new window that will allow you to search for your training account by typing in Boomi Training into the search bar. Next, we have the Lifecycle panel. This represents quick links to the overall lifecycle of your process, which includes the Dashboard, the Build tab, the Deploy tab, and the Manage tab. Now we can take a closer look at the Build tab, which is where we're going to learn how to develop a process from beginning to end. It's also the first step in the development lifecycle. If you click the green plus New button, you will access the Create Component window, where you can create new components. You can also take a look at the Component Explorer, which lists all of the process components which exist within the account. As you can see, this is set up as a typical folder structure, so you can easily categorize and find all of the different components that you create throughout your integrations. Next, we have the Universal Component bars. This contains all of your opened tabs, as well as the Save, Close and Close buttons. It's important to note Atomsphere does not have an autosave function, but you are prompted to save when leaving and executing, so make sure you save as often as possible. Next, we have the Process Canvas. This is where you're going to create and execute your processes within the actual Build tab itself. You'll be using this in conjunction with your Shapes palette here, which displays all of the available execution and logic shapes that are available. And finally, we have the Process Action buttons, which helps you set up your options, extensions, notes, how to show navigation, and most importantly, how to run a test. We also have another feature called the Process Library, which I would like to talk about right now. The Process Library allows master accounts to publish processes and API components to sub-accounts, which can serve as templates for new processes. Users can access these published processes and install copies within their own accounts. Dell Boomi also publishes processes for all account users to install as samples and snippets to help direct development for certain common integration patterns. You can access the Process Library by clicking on the Browse Process Library button located at the bottom of the Component Explorer section. As you can see in the screenshot here, Boomi has specific built-in process templates and continues to add new processes each month. We are actually going to utilize the Process Library feature to install specific training processes for our activities during all training courses. The processes are listed by class name under the Boomi Training parent. You can also search by the process name, connector, end system, or description in the search box. Of course, the processes are just templates that will get us started. We're still going to need to develop, create, add, and configure shapes as part of our integration process. So you may have noticed that I've referenced the term Boomi integration throughout our training course. So let's talk a little bit about what that is. Now that you have a better understanding of the AtomSphere platform and many of the options we'll be using, it's time to learn about the Dell Boomi integration. Let's begin by answering the question, what is a Dell Boomi integration? Dell Boomi makes it possible for companies to integrate applications, data, and trading partners directly from the web by using a visual designer with access to a library of integration components. These integration components, referred to as shapes, are easily added by clicking and dragging and dropping them onto the process canvas, and then connecting one to the other. As we can see on the screen here, it's fairly easy to understand the process flow, moving left to right. Once you begin building your own processes, you'll quickly become familiar with each shape and better understand its function. Another term we'll be using during our class is called an AtomSphere process. So what is an AtomSphere process? It is the core integration component, typically representing a discrete workflow which moves documents from one application to another. Processes are built, deployed, and managed. They contain all shapes and components required in a full integration flow. And the act of running a process is called an execution. An AtomSphere process and a Dell Boomi integration are pretty interchangeable in most cases. A good way to think of the difference is a process is a single group of connected shapes that perform a desired action. An integration refers to the total integration solution for a particular desired action. In many cases, you will only need a single process to complete an integration solution, but for more complex actions, you may need an integration solution that's made up of several processes. So far, we've discussed what an actual integration and process are, and we mentioned that they're made up of these things called shapes. So let's take a moment here to discuss what a shape is. You'll find the shapes available to you from the Build tab. They're contained in a palette as shown in the picture up on your screen right now. They are grouped under three categories. We have connectors, execute, and logic headings. You can add shapes to the process canvas and connect them. By connecting these shapes, you control how the data flows within the process. Each shape within the process performs a specific task on the data that's given, and in turn can place transformed data back into the process to be manipulated by other shapes further down the path. Every shape is a bundle of pre-configured code that performs a very specific task. These shapes remove the need to do any coding and only require specific fields to be filled out. These shapes can be found in the Component Explorer under three categories. Execute shapes manipulate or transform data. This includes tasks such as changing the document type, such as XML, CSV, flat file, and combining or separating records between documents, and even manipulating certain parts of data statically or dynamically. Logic shapes control the flow of data through the process. You can route documents down different paths, create a series of mandatory paths to separate different branches of a process, or even set up logic to validate your data based off of specific criteria. And finally, we have connector shapes, which get data into the process or send data out of the process. This happens via connections made to tools such as databases, FTPs, and CRM systems, just to name a few. Now, some of the shapes we'll be using today include our map and set property shape. Our map is going to transform our data from one format to another using something called profiles, which we'll learn in an upcoming slide. Another execute shape we'll be using today is the set property shape, which we're going to use in order to set a specific file name for some of the documents that are coming through our process. We'll also be using a logic shape, which is known as the branch, which is essentially going to create multiple routes for our documents to flow down. And finally, for our connector shapes, we'll be using the FTP and disk connector shapes as we go through our process. These are essentially going to bring in data or send data out of our process. Another very important concept we need to understand before actually getting into any of our activities is the idea of a component. Components are reusable configuration objects, including APIs, certificate connections, connector operations, cross-reference tables, and many more. They are also listed in the Component Explorer that I mentioned earlier and showed you that exists within the Build tab. One of the most important things about components is that they can be created once and referenced by process shapes across multiple processes. This modular design simplifies maintenance because configuration changes can be made once and then instantly applied everywhere that the component is referenced. In this class, we'll be using a number of components, such as connectors, each of which contains a connection and an operation component. We'll also be using profiles and maps. An understanding of components is vital to becoming a competent developer. I do understand there is a lot to learn, but having a basic understanding of what a component is will be sufficient for today's class. To learn more about the intricacies of components, search components in the user guide. Now, from a high level, configuring an integration in AtomSphere is a three-step process. We've discussed the first step, so let's talk about the others before we deploy and manage our integration. So the first step is to construct an integration in the Build tab. Using our Visio-like workflow, you can drag and drop shapes to configure your integration for logic, validation, data cleansing, and transformation from source to destination systems. AtomSphere supports over 100 branded connectors to systems like Salesforce, NetSuite, and SAP, and over 10 traditional connectors such as database, Flatfile, XML, and even web services. Our connectors allow you to abstract away the code traditionally required to connect to an application, leaving you with a visual, wizard-driven approach. Once your integration is built based off of your requirements, the second step is to deploy the integration. Using our Atom technology, we support the ability to deploy an integration in the cloud for integrating between SaaS, PaaS, and other cloud applications, or safely behind your firewall to connect to on-premise applications. Finally, in the third step, you can centrally manage all of your deployed integrations anywhere that you have an internet connection. From this dashboard, you can see what's processed, when it's processed, and view the logs and status of each integration. It also allows for system alert notifications that automatically notify you via RSS or email when an integration is successful or in error. This concludes this video and this portion of our training class.